Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JonPielli.com. Today's the 11th of January, 2018. A ton of different stuff we're going to get into today in regards to the world of sports. We will talk a little baseball in probably, about 10, 15 minutes or so. Number, if you want to be involved in the program, is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. A couple different things that interest me today. I'm interested in some perspective in regards to the Rooney Rule in the NFL. Because the way that I see it, I think it's easy to say that the rule itself is a little bit of, let's say a farce per se. Somebody that wants to hire a certain coach could bring in a minority candidate and say that they are interviewing a minority candidate and they did their job in regards to the Rooney Rule, but it's easy to see through. It is. You look at it and you say it's not really the way it was intended to be. And I think there is some truth to that. I do. I believe that in some cases the rule is not being used the way it was intended. And I look at it and I think that we live in a day and age where we have ideas of what we're looking to do. And if you're asking a National Football League organization, from the ownership down to the general manager to everybody that is making all of the important decisions that are involved in the game, you're going to have some things that are predetermined. And I use the situation in Oakland with the Raiders as a prime example. I don't think the Oakland Raiders were trying to be quote-unquote racist or deceptive, or were not trying to do the rule in regards to the Rooney Rule in the NFL by hiring Jon Gruden. I said earlier, and a lot of other people have backed up this same point, the prime reason that the Oakland Raiders made a coaching change was because of the availability or the interest in Jon Gruden. If Jon Gruden is not ready to leave the broadcast booth and become the Raiders head coach, then there is probably, or at least I would say, a 50-50 chance that the Oakland Raiders don't make a coaching change, that they stick with Jack Del Rio. So they are one of the unique circumstances, or one of the unique examples, that the Raiders decide at some point that they're going to make a coaching change. I don't think they were going to make a coaching change if Jon Gruden was available or wasn't available. Mark Davis felt that the Raiders made a mistake years ago when they decided to trade Gruden to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and obviously it was his dad, Al, that made that decision or made the determination to do that. So once he had decided that he was interested in bringing Gruden back, this was obviously a process that lasted quite a bit of time. It wasn't just this year that he decided that he was going to bring back Jon Gruden, or he was going to pursue Jon Gruden in regards to being the next coach of the Oakland Raiders. So this was, number one, a unique circumstance. And I think that every organization in the NFL, and I believe in other sports should adopt this rule as well. I think that it makes sense to push to get more minorities involved, because we're looking at the grand scheme of things. We're looking at the NFL the way it exists right now, and with Jim Caldwell losing his job in Detroit, there's only 6 minority head coaches. It's a diverse game where the players on the field are quote unquote minorities. The percentage of blacks and Hispanics that are playing in the National Football League is way higher than that of whites. So why, when it comes to leadership, are there so many white head coaches? So the premise and the reason for the Rooney Rule, I'm supporting 100%. But I don't think you could expect every single situation to be run the same. The Oakland Raiders were not going to make a coaching change unless Jon Gruden was willing to be the next head coach. And I think it's that simple. It may be the one exception to the rule, but the Raiders did their due diligence. They interviewed minority candidates. The one thing that I look at when it comes to interviewing minority candidates, even in some cases where somebody's just going through the motions and doing it just for the sake of doing it, that interview has a chance to get that person their next job. The National Football League, same thing as Major League Baseball, same thing as the NBA, the same thing as the NHL, same thing as Major League Soccer, if you want to throw that in there. They all have word of mouth. You have people that are involved in one organization that have ties to another. There are friends that are running one organization that are friends with organizations, other organizations. Because of that, word of mouth can spread. And any candidate, particularly a minority candidate, has a chance to impress in that interview. And it might be an interview, let's say, for the Oakland Raiders where you know the job's going to Jon Gruden. But if you come in there with a plan and you prove to the ownership and the people that are interviewing you that beyond a reasonable doubt you have the ability to make an organization, a team better, you're going to get a job. And if for some reason you can't get a job, then yes, you could call racism. You could say that their race has 100% to do with the reason that that person isn't getting a job. But at least you're putting it on the situation that we're seeing, as opposed to not giving that person that opportunity, saying the Raiders should not have interviewed anybody else but Jon Gruden because they knew Jon Gruden was getting a job. No. The fact that there was a couple potential candidates that may not have been considered by the Oakland Raiders, they had an opportunity to go out there and hit the interview out of the park. And you look what happened a series of years ago when Bill Cowher left the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm sure the Rooneys themselves had ideas of who they were interested in giving the Steelers head coach job to. They interviewed Mike Tomlin. And the only reason that they may have interviewed Mike Tomlin could have possibly been because of the Rooney Rule. And Mike Tomlin came in there as a coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings and set the Pittsburgh Steelers up to a point where they would have been fools if they didn't hire Mike Tomlin as their next head coach. He won the job because of the Rooney Rule. So that assistant coach that may have gotten an interview with the Oakland Raiders because of the rule could have very much the potential to get himself his next job because of the way he performed in that interview. And you've heard many cases of potential candidates that have gotten an opportunity to interview and just didn't do a good enough job. So there has to be some accountability in there. If you're being given an interview for whatever reason, the onus is on you to go out there and impress. The onus is on you to go in there and have a plan. Show that you belong. Show that you're ready to be a head coach. In this case, in the National Football League. And if you're able to do that, you may not get that job, but you will get a job. When it comes to track records, we look at the NFL the way it exists right now. And I'll tell you, there's nobody that stands out. Yes, you got the coordinators for the New England Patriots that no matter who the coordinators are going to be, they're going to draw some interest from other teams. Josh McDaniels is probably getting a job. Matt Patricia is probably getting a job. Wilkes from, Carolina is probably going to get a job. There's teams that have succeeded by going this route of the top assistant or the top coordinator. But there's also been many examples of people that have gone in there and taken these jobs and failed. There's a lot of coaches out there that were top coordinators and are still in the waiting stages of what are they as a head coach. Some of them aren't looking very good right now. But I tell you, the minority candidates in the National Football League have a chance. And hopefully we will see this impact in the near future. But just because somebody gets a job, gets an interview just because of the Rooney Rule, doesn't mean that they're being disregarded. They have to take some responsibility themselves when they have these interviews. The job that's going to Jon Gruden doesn't mean that the person that's interviewing because of the Rooney Rule is not going to be the next great head coach. And you know what? One of the candidates that were in there had an opportunity to put a presentation together, to meet with ownership, to discuss in their interview why they would be the next great head coach of the Raiders and what they would do if they had the opportunity to be the coach of the Oakland Raiders. And if the answer to that after that presentation is, listen, you really blew us away, but we are hiring Jon Gruden. You can't call racism out there. But I'll tell you, because of word of mouth, that person is going to get themselves a job. And you know what? The Raiders, maybe 5 years down the road, look back on it and say, hey, we should have hired this guy because look what he's doing somewhere else. I think there's positive things that are going on with the Rooney Rule. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the answers. We're not seeing the positive results. We're not seeing 12, 15, 17, 18 coaches that are minorities in the National Football League. Another thing I wanted to bring up too, we talk about ownership. Why are there not as many minority owners? Somebody may want to say, and this is something that I completely disagree with, but the idea could be thrown out there. They could talk about income levels, but there are many minority out there that have a lot of capital, have a lot of money, have been very successful. They're entrepreneurs. The day and age that we live in now is seeing minorities succeed at a level we've never seen it before. So we talk about millionaires that happen to be minorities. Some of them can step forward and say, hey, I want to own an NFL team. I want to own a Major League Baseball team. Being an owner is not easy. How many owners go out there and run an organization just because of the money that they have? Not a lot of them do it. Some of them did in the past. Some of them had some very good success. But when it comes to ownership of a professional sports team, you have to be able to take the chance of losing your investment or losing money over a series of years and still be okay. And you know what? It doesn't matter what your race or your credence is. It has to do with what you have down here. And it's to have the balls to be able to go out there and lose your own money in an investment. And I'd like to see more minority owners have the you-know-what to say, you know what? I'm willing to risk what I've earned. I'm willing to risk the money that I have in my own capital to turn this franchise around and make it a profitable one over time. So the one thing that I say, you can't really scream race when it comes to ownership. Because ownership comes down to one thing. It doesn't come down to what you look like. It doesn't come down to the difference between me and you and that person. It comes down to the amount of money that you have. So if you have the money, you should have the opportunity to own. We're not in the Jim Crow days anymore, where 31 owners are going to say no just because of the color of that person's skin. If that person has the capital, has the money, and the support to be able to do it, they should be approved in the National Football League, or they should be approved in Major League Baseball. If you disagree with me, throw a comment, please. I want to have this discussion. You may say that racism involves itself when it comes to coaching or general managers, but it doesn't when it comes to owners. When it comes to ownership, it comes down to one thing. A white person's money is not better than a black person's money or a Hispanic person's money. It's all the same. Money is the same. It's about having a cojones to be able to make that type of investment. And it doesn't matter what you look like. All the money is the same. If you have the money, go for it. And I hope we hit a certain time where we could see more minority owners. The Rooney Rule in the NFL, to this point, it hasn't worked the way we like to see it work. And I'd like to see more minority candidates get the opportunity to be interviewed. But I tell you, the sport, just like in baseball, just like in basketball, and just like in hockey, it is about word of mouth. And it's about making that presentation. It's about going in there and impressing the organization. And even if they choose not to hire you, they know enough people. Word of mouth will travel. And I do believe over time we're going to see a change. John Pielli, Pass Ball Show, 732-364-3598. If you're listening, if you have any take on anything that I just said, please call in. Go to town on me if you want. 732-364-3598. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to the National Football League. We talk about, you could single out the New York Football Giants when we're talking about this. And that's the locker room, the personalities, the infighting that you see. And it doesn't just happen with the New York Giants right now. It's happening with many different teams and many different locker rooms. And doesn't just apply to football. It applies to baseball, to basketball, to hockey. The one common thing that I'm seeing in regards to locker rooms and clubhouses and people kind of doing their own thing, I see some similarities to what we're talking about when we're talking about the millennial generation. The millennial generation has been raised with a lack of discipline. Lack of discipline is coming from parents. The lack of discipline is being thrown out there by the general public telling people how to raise their kids. The fact that if you even think about putting your hand on a child, it's a criminal offense. And children are being brought up with a sense of entitlement, getting the pat on the back, the participation trophy, everything that's involved with it, and they're being told that everything's okay. And you can act however it is that you want to act. The problem is that generations upon generations before them were told there was a certain way you acted, and there was a certain way that you do not act. And if you choose to act in this other way, there are consequences for your actions. We've gone through a whole generation now of children that have not been told that if you act a certain way, there are consequences. You're seeing it all throughout America right now. When you got people that don't like the results of the presidential election, feel like they can't leave their house and they need a safe space to be in because they're so scared. But the reason that they're so scared isn't because of anything that's happened. It's the fact that they have not been taught any discipline by their parents. And they've gone out into the real world and they don't know how to conduct themselves. They don't know how to handle adversity. They don't know how to make the most of a situation that is not optimum. If things don't work out your way, no, you don't crawl in a ball and cry about it. You figure out how to make the most out of a situation that is not ideal. So how does this apply to the clubhouse chemistry or the locker room presence that we're all talking about in the National Football League? You have people that have not been taught discipline, thrown in an environment where they're by themselves and are acting however it is that they want to act. And when we talk about coaching now, if a coach decides to be a little tougher when it comes to the way they're handling their locker room, they're looked at as an outcast now. So when we're talking about coaches, if I'm interviewing as a head coach in the National Football League, I'm going to talk about how much I am going to bring discipline back in my locker room. And I'm going to set a series of rules. And if the players aren't willing to abide by these rules, there's going to be discipline. It's not going to be a matter of sitting out a quarter. It's not a matter of sitting out a game. If players have decided that they're not going to obey by the rules, they're not going to play for my football team. And I wonder how many of these teams that are looking for new head coaches in the NFL are looking for somebody that is going to have some sort of order. And is going to ask that every player on my team acts a certain way. And is not going to accept infighting. And when it comes to that, it doesn't matter what you look like in regards to a head coach. It is about the message. And I wonder when the National Football League is going to turn it over and decide that they're going to look for coaches that are going to have more of a handle on what's going on in a locker room. Do you think Bill Parcells would accept the stuff that's going on in the Giants locker room right now? No. He would have cut half of those players before it even became a story in the media. When Bob McNair went out there and said the inmates were running to prison, that was a terrible choice of words. But if he meant to say the inmates were running the asylum, it's applying to the culture of a locker room in the National Football League. Now, I think completely different when it comes to the players deciding to kneel for the national anthem. I think that's a completely different subject. I think players should have the right to do that if they feel. Because what they are protesting, number one, they're protesting the president right now. And you know what? Anybody that feels a certain way should have a right to not believe in the president, not care for the president. Just as much as somebody should say, hey, I do believe in the president. The protest, which started with Colin Kaepernick for police brutality, the players that decided to support that were supporting the cause. And when it became protesting against the president, they had a cause to do that. So that's where I draw the line. I don't have any problem with any players that are going out there protesting the national anthem because they're protesting the president right now. And every time the president decides to say something, you can react whatever way that you want. That's the risk that he has given to himself by putting himself out there like that. But the point that I'm trying to make in regards to locker room chemistry and the way players are choosing to act, there is a lack of discipline. And the point that I'm making also is it has nothing to do with the protests that are going on in regards to the national anthem. We have a generation now of children who have become men and women, and they were not shown the difference between right and wrong, and not shown that there's consequences for their actions if they choose to not do what they're told or do what they're supposed to do. And they're flooding the locker rooms and clubhouses of all the professional sports now, just like they are flooding the workplace of all businesses throughout this country. Success is based off of being able to deal with adversity. And not everything's going to work out the exact way that you want it to. And you have a choice. When something doesn't work out the way you want it to, you could pout and cry and yell and scream and make a fool of yourself. Or you could try to figure out an alternative plan. Try to do something a little bit different. Because you know what? A lot of people that are succeeding right now are doing that because they know how to handle adversity. As we hit the halfway point here on the Pass Ball Show. 732-364-3598. You want to involve yourself? Sure. Come on. Talking about the Rooney Rule. Talking about a lack of discipline that exists amongst a whole generation of adults right now. A group that was once children have now been raised through an entire generation without discipline. And we're finding it that not only it's impacting the sports world, but it's impacting the business world too. And I'm not an advocate for violence or abuse. But there has to be consequences for one's actions. And it has to be taught at a younger age. If somebody's going to continue to defy the rules of what they're supposed to do, there has to be consequences. Just like if somebody decides that they're going to take it upon themselves to break the law, there are consequences to your action. When you decide to not do what the law says that you do, you will at some point have to face consequences. Moving on, the world of baseball, the New York Mets agree to a contract with Jay Bruce to bring him back next year, 3 years, $39 million. I like the Mets' patience in regards to this. Jay Bruce was looking for 5 years, about $70 million, or maybe even more, when he became a free agent. So there's obviously speculation over where the New York Mets are in regards to having money, having the ability to address the needs that they have. And I'm not saying I told you so, but the way the market is set up in regards to free agency this year, there's still over 100 free agents out there that haven't been signed. There's been a series of a lot of teams that have needs that they haven't addressed yet. So the thought that the New York Mets would decide under some circumstance that, hey, we're going to wait things out. Are you telling me that that was not a smart decision? Because by jumping the gun and going out there and make contractual offers to players that obviously were looking for the moon, would have under no circumstances been an intelligent move. Now, have they done well by signing Jay Bruce? I think he helps them. I think it was a good enough move where you're going to put potentially 25 to 35 home runs in your lineup. You're looking at a guy that can play some first base. If you get yourself a healthy Conforto, Lagares, and Nimmo become something in center field, and Cespedes is healthy, you could play him at first base if Dominic Smith isn't getting the job done. And the Mets didn't commit themselves a ton of money, not just for this year, but over the course of 3 years. So it's hard to knock that move. The question is, all right, are you going to address the other needs that you have on your team? I still believe the Mets should bring in another reliever, but I tell you, the relief market, I mean, from Andrew Bailey, who was on the show yesterday, can certainly help a team, assuming he's healthy. Houston Street is a former closer. He could certainly help a team. There's many relievers that may not be coming off the greatest of seasons, but have track records that have been able to help other teams before that can help you going forward. Some can help you on a minor league contract. Some can help you on a one-year contract where it's not going to cost you a whole lot of money. And then, of course, there's still Greg Holland and Addison Reed, if you want to pay the market value for that. Both of those pitchers are going to be compensated pretty well. And if you look at the one aspect of the free agent market where players have been compensated very well, and in some cases been compensated a little bit more than they ever have before, it's relief pitchers, and it's top relief pitchers. So Greg Holland's going to get his 4, maybe a 5-year deal. I'd be a little scared if I was that team that gave him that 5th year. But he could certainly get 4 years at $17 million a season. That's what Wade Davis got over the course of 3 when he signed with the Colorado Rockies. But going back to the point I was making in regards to, it doesn't even have to be about the Mets. It could be about any team that could look to add one more reliever. You don't necessarily got to pay top dollar for Greg Holland and Addison Reed right now. I think there's enough options. And certainly pitchers and their agents that are monitoring the market a little bit may want to hold off on signing that 1-year deal for about $4 or $5 million, when maybe they could still get a multi-year deal. They may want to hold off taking that minor league contract when they may be able to find an option where they could get a guaranteed 1-year deal. But if I'm the Mets right now, I can't stop at Jay Bruce. And I'm not going to say just Jay Bruce, because a week ago, there was a question over whether the Mets were going to sign any premium free agent whatsoever. So I'm not going to all of a sudden, once they've signed Jay Bruce, say it's just Jay Bruce. I think they've taken a stand to a point where they want to put a competitive team on the field right now. I don't think this offseason is going to go by where they haven't addressed either third base or second base, either through free agency or through a trade. Now, the trade market is a little tough. You heard that they were close to making a deal for Jason Kipnis. They were interested in Ian Kinsler. The problem is the Mets farm system is pretty weak right now. And unless you're going to deal top guys that you're looking to as a solution within a foreseeable future, the Mets don't have a big base to trade from. So I don't know where they're thinking about going in regards to trades. Maybe Jason Kipnis is a guy that could be had for the right price. But the Mets are probably going to have to, if they need to, or I believe they need to, get themselves a third baseman or a second baseman. A Todd Frazier probably is most fitting. Now, some fans may say, well, you know what? Todd Frazier doesn't excite me enough. He struggled to hit 200. He hit 210 last year. He strikes out a lot. He might be a good fit for the Mets. I look at him and I compare him to Mike Moustakas. And a lot of people are high on Mike Moustakas. And he had a breakout season last year. It was the best year that he's had since he's come up to the major leagues with the Kansas City Royals. but I'm not 100% sold that you're going to get the value in a 4 or 5 year contract with Mike Moustakas because he hasn't proven it at a long enough stage in Major League Baseball. I'd rather let Moustakas sign with somebody else, whether it's St. Louis, whether it's San Diego, whether it's back with Kansas City, and look back at that decision a couple of years down the road and say, should we have signed him or should we not have signed him? Sometimes the best moves that you make are the ones that you don't make. And if we look at Mike Moustakas in year 2 or year 3 of his next contract, when he say, all right, he's okay, but he's not an all-star. He hasn't performed to the level he did in his free agent year in 2017 with the Kansas City Royals. You say, hey, maybe we're better off not making that move. I think you could get Todd Frazier on a 2-year contract with an option. I think he's got that 1-year contract offer with the Yankees sitting in his hands. So if you want Todd Frazier, you're going to have to go with more than 1 year. But there's nothing wrong with giving him an offer of 2 years guaranteed with an option. Maybe throw a buyout in with that 3rd year. So you're guaranteeing him something and making a call for that 3rd year. I think he signs it. And I think you got a good defensive third baseman. It certainly hits for a lot of power. He's shown to be a very good influence in the clubhouse. Plus, he's playing with his former teammate, Jay Bruce. So you're building a cohesion within your organization. The connection to Mickey Callaway, being the manager. Having Jay Bruce for a couple months last year. Jay Bruce has already been with the Mets. Todd Frazier gets welcomed in. I think there's some positive things going on if you add Todd Frazier to Jay Bruce in this offseason. Now, I'm not going to get into what I could project for the teams in regards to next season because, once again, there's 100 free agents that are out there. At some point, they're all going to sign. Maybe one team signs 2 or 3 of them and reshapes the landscape of what you thought their team was going to be. The Atlanta Braves, I think, are going to be pretty interesting. If I'm Alex Anthopoulos, I go to the Miami Marlins and say, hey, what will it take to bring in Christian Yelich and JT Realmuto? I know the Braves got a decent outfield. They still got Nick Markakis under contract. They got Ronald Acuna, who's going to be their star outfielder in the future. And they got Ender Inciarte. So does Yelich give them a little bit too much? Yeah. But maybe you find a taker for Nick Markakis. Who, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to have to look this up, is on the last year of his contract. If he is, why would that not be a fit for somebody for 1 year? And I understand Nick Markakis is not a guy that's going to lead another team to a championship. But I tell you, this is a guy that probably you could garner some interest in. And his contract is, yes, 4 years, $44 million. Last year is 2018. And one thing about Nick Markakis, he's not necessarily been an all-star, and he hasn't been in his entire career. And he hasn't put up the same numbers that he put up all those years with the Baltimore Orioles. But he's a guy that's going to go out there and play 155-plus games. He's going to drive in some runs. He's going to hit for a reasonable average, 270-ish. You know, it's not that attractive when you see somebody with an OPS in the 7s. And his OPS plus is around league average. So you say for a guy that is on the last year of his contract, making in this last year $11 million, so they balanced it out, $11 million over for each of 4 years. If the Braves make a deal and bring in Yelich, I think they can move Markakis to somebody that can find a use for him. And I'm trying to think, like you look at a lot of teams that may have two good outfielders and another spot where they're just platooning guys. I think he could certainly help. And I tell you, if I'm the Braves, I'm on the phone with the Miami Marlins saying, what will it take? We could use Real Muto as our catcher. We could use Yelich in the outfield. Maybe even throw in a Starlin Castro if it enhances the pot. If the Braves want to spend some quality prospects. The Braves are in a position where I think they can act now. I already see the Phillies doing it. And I don't know what the rest of the Philadelphia Phillies offseason entails. But I could see them getting involved. Maybe bring in another player. Another starting pitcher if they want. They've addressed their bullpen. Maybe they'll add another reliever. They could do that too. You know, they brought in Neshek and Tommy Hunter. A couple of low-budget guys that had pretty good years last year. But I think the difference between some teams that are rebuilding and maybe taking that step forward this year as opposed to next year could be a little bit more of a veteran presence. But, you know, looking from the Mets right now, the signing of Jay Bruce is a little bit of a notification that, all right, they're in business. Things aren't as doomy and gloomy as the average Mets fan would make it out to be. You have a chance right now to maybe make that one more move. And I do think a signing of Todd Frazier would put them in a very good position for next year. You could play as Drupal at second base. You got Rosario, who you expect to be a star, but it may not happen overnight. Michael Conforto's hurt. Yoenis Cespedes, you hope he's on a better training regimen and is not having the same hamstring problems he was having last year. And he's still got the pitchers. You got Noah Syndergaard, you got Jacob deGrom. You have 3, 4, 5 in a rotation. That's a series of wild cards. If you get anything from Matt Harvey, you'd be happy. If Steven Matz could show that he's healthy over the course of a full season, I think he's going to be pretty good. Zach Wheeler's there. Seth Lugo is there. You have a chance to have a very good starting pitching staff if you can have enough of these guys stay healthy. But I think what the Mets fan needed to see was an interest in doing something. It had been a very quiet offseason. Remember, it's been a quiet offseason for just about everybody. So we're waiting to see a domino fall. And they went out there and they signed Jay Bruce. And I'm looking forward to the press conference where he gets reintroduced. This is a guy that looked very good in New York last year. He showed he can handle the city. When the Mets had Conforto and Cespedes and Bruce hitting back to back to back, it provided a matchup disadvantage to the opposition. They just need one more bat. I think Frazier, if he's put in the right spot of that lineup, could make them a little bit better. And I tell you, look at the National League East, and I know the Washington Nationals are going to be the prohibitive favorites. They look like they got everything that they need. Their bullpen has improved. Strasburg and Scherzer. You got Harper and Daniel Murphy in their last year. 2018 is a lot bigger for the Washington Nationals than it is for any other team in that division. Bryce Harper's hitting free agency. And I tell you, you could come up with the best plan that you got if you're Mike Rizzo and the Lerner family. But Bryce Harper's going to the highest bidder. And Daniel Murphy is not going to take a team-friendly contract. Daniel Murphy is looking at himself saying, wow, I can't believe that I took this 3-year contract. He didn't bet on himself. He's going to look to cash in his next contract, especially if he has a big year. So the Washington Nationals are going to be not not only competing with themselves, but they're going to be competing with a lot of other teams that are going to want Bryce Harper. The Dodgers. I don't think the Yankees, from an ideological standpoint, make sense. I mean, are you really going to try to throw an outfield out of Judge, Stanton, and Harper? It just doesn't make sense. But there's going to be enough teams that are going to be in the $300 million range, the $400 million range. The Phillies that I was telling you about are right on the verge of getting back into competition, and they got money. This is going to be the last year for the Washington Nationals. If they can't advance past the first round of the playoffs, they may be heading downhill for the next several years. And I know they built a pretty good team. Scherzer and Strasburg and Anthony Rendon. Nothing to be upset about. They're good players. Scherzer's the Cy Young Award winner. Strasburg will probably be a Cy Young Award winner at some point in his career. But they're not the same without Harper. They're not the same without Daniel Murphy. So the National League East, we're wondering what team is going to be that next team that's going to fight. What team is the next team that could potentially take over that division for the next 4 to 6 years? Conventional wisdom would have said it was the Mets. Well, the Mets are in a spot where they're going to pretty much figure out what they're about this year. They're either going to be an 80 to 84 win team, or they're going to be a team that's going to take it to the next level and maybe take over that division. But if they don't take it this year, the Phillies or the Braves might. The only team that's quit in that National League East is the Miami Marlins. And they've said that they're not going to be competitive for a while. They got the 30th best farm system out of 30 teams in Major League Baseball. And they just traded away their top players. If the Miami Marlins are not projected to win 50 games next year, then I want to see how they can win more than 50 games. Be back with you tomorrow. Right here, if you want. We'll have the show today on YouTube. You can hear my take on the Rooney Rule. You can hear my take on minority owners in professional sports. You can also hear me talk some baseball. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.
Rock over London, rock on Chicago. Wheaties, breakfast of champions.